and learning the foundational,
Sorry,
uh,
I just restarted. Keep going.
so that's okay. They, yeah, they just had to like really make sure that, I'm sorry, that's not true. They had to like, they missed the whole foundational skills essentially in kindergarten and first grade because either they were masked up or they weren't in school,
Yeah,
right? And
COVID really
so,
messed that up too. Yeah, the mask, because if you can't see the mouth, which
yeah,
is
it's
a lot of what you
huge.
do. Uh-huh.
It's So I have several students who are like third and fourth grade who I've taken back to a first grade curriculum where we are starting from short vowels and hitting every single vowel until we've got it down. So that's really what I focus on. I just got Orton Gillingham trained, which was
Oh,
awesome.
awesome. Yeah, I wanted to.
Loved it.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes, I would love to tell you about my trainer's information. She's incredible. But yeah, and then I'm also taking a class just on the science of reading. So because I left teaching 6 years ago, the science of reading has been around for years and years. It's just this huge body of research of how our brain processes reading because our brains are not wired to read. We're wired for speech, but we have to be explicitly taught how to read.
Right,
And yes, some kids pick it up faster than others, but most of us need to be explicitly taught how a sound we hear is represented by a grapheme or letters, right?
right.
Which is our symbol. And so that's what I focus on in tutoring is I really focus on like a very systematic and explicit instructional method. So I have a certain like order I do things in. It includes phonemic awareness. It includes dictation, so hearing a word and writing down the sounds. It includes a lot of blending and segmenting. Um, and then it includes lots of games and activities. And then on top of that, we work on heart words. So sight words is a really confusing term because we were raised to think that means you have to memorize words that
Yeah,
have tricky parts. Not true. So there's like a whole movement with that right now, trying to get people to understand that's not actually what a sight word is. We're going to try and call it heart words. Instead, where you just have a certain part of the word that you have to memorize, an irregular part. So like if you take the word said and you said the sounds for said are said. So normally a kid would hear that and spell it S-E-D, but we have to teach them that is spelled A-I. And A-I normally says long A, but this time it doesn't. And so you just have to teach them that sound, that's your heart part. And I draw a little heart over it. And we talk about, we have to remember that part by heart. And then you do this whole process called orthographic mapping, which is actually just how your brain remembers words and sounds. And it's really cool. It's really cool science. But I use a word map and I teach them heart words or irregularly spelled words through that. That's a huge part of my process too. And then once we've gotten those heart words down and we've learned the sound of the day that we're working on, then I put it all together and we write sentences with it, with both of those. So say we're working on short A and we've got a couple sight words in there and we work on that. We put them together. I read sentence strips with them that are just focused on that sound. So I really like to hyper focus on the sound spelling pattern we're working on until they've got it down and they've mastered it. And I don't move on until they've mastered it, which typically with my process is pretty quick. There are kids that like have kind of dyslexia red flags going off for me where we take longer because dyslexia requires a ton of repetition and a lot of tactile learning. And so I just work with them more on those sounds, but it's been really interesting to see like as they progress, like, oh wow, you're really getting it. Like, let's move on to the next sound spelling pattern. Like, we're good. We're good with short vowels. We're moving on to blends. But I don't move on unless they're showing me like they've mastered it. And I also use a ton of assessments. So I assess throughout, just really simple, like really simple. This is the skill we just worked on. Here's a quick assessment. I can assess them just by giving them spelling like words with that sound spelling pattern and asking them to spell it, not offering any help. And I can instantly tell, okay, we can move on or we need more time. And then you asked about like how I know if they're ready to graduate tutoring with me. It's kind of between the parent and me. So I just trust the parents' lead. Obviously, they're investing their time and money, right? Having a tutor. So I had a little kiddo just graduate. He still could probably use a little bit of help, but his mom now feels like equipped on how to help him. And
No,
then
yeah.
he has improved so much that she's like, okay, I think like as a family we can take it from here.
And that's cool because I don't know if I'd mentioned this to you, but I tutored for a little while after my son was born and we lived in Arizona. So I my last year teaching also was when I was pregnant, partially because I wanted to just be super present and focused. But then I was also still worried about the kiddos out there that needed a little extra help. So I started a local tutoring business. And primarily, there was one kiddo that I had to help specifically with math. And I usually only took kids between kindergarten and fourth or fifth. But we had a really good friend who their son just kind of needed someone to sit and like remind him of the assignments and to do some research with him. He was like in sixth grade. And then I occasionally would like tutor a high schooler in Spanish, again, using that. But anyway, it was most of the time reading, maybe some writing that they came to me for.
Yeah.
There was one kiddo that was in first grade that was flipping things around, very dyslexic. And also, we would just do a lot of reading passages, not just to like read and time it, but then the comprehension afterwards.
Mhm.
Because one thing that I've noticed with my son is like how he's in first grade. So like as you're saying things too about teaching the rules and the exceptions, I've been so amazed that he'll come home and say, um, he's helping his sister as he cares for trying to read her book. Oh, you know what this word says? Because this is a special rule where E doesn't actually say eh, it says E. Or like, it's just funny because he'll say, there's a rule, or that's a rule breaker. My teacher
Yeah.
calls those rule breakers, and it's so cute. So it sounds like you're doing the same thing when you do those heart words and you're focusing on, yeah, teaching that you just have to like teach them. These are the exceptions. I'm really sorry. They're going to be that way. You just have to memorize them. And when we think about it, like you were saying, with the science of reading, what's so fascinating to me is we are born with all the capacity and potential, usually. We're born healthy and sane and well to learn to do many things, right? But learning to speak and learning to walk are going to happen long before learning to read.
Yeah.
And learning to read, like you said, does have to be taught. Some kids pick it up faster than others. I feel like it definitely helps if there's involvement at home.
Yeah.
If there aren't parents that are willing to be read to or like inviting the kid to read, or so what we do at our house, it's not a chore chart, but it's called a responsibility chart. And each day, the big kids have and this goes through the summer too, because there's the summer slide. We don't need to talk too much about it, but it happens when kids get a break from school, and your tutoring business will probably kick up a lot in the
Yeah.
summer, even for that reason alone. But they have like they just attach when they've done their workbook page, or for my daughter, it's mostly handwriting slips because we've gotten our name down. Um, Everything else is kind of a jumble. So we're just trying to work on each letter, and they focus on letters at a certain time, which I've seen you talk about on Reading Noodle on Instagram. Is like, you don't start with A, you start with like M, and you go through and you've got that list there. And I think that's important because if we do want to do right by our kid and give them a good chance to learn, we need to do it the right way. So the science of reading is incredible, but there's not a single person who is born reading, right? We're wired for it, but like there's so much there's so much going on in the brain and the neural synapses just to be able to make the sounds, let alone blend them and then read and make
Yeah.
sense of the reading, that it's like actually a really cool miracle that we can read, but at the same time we take it for granted. There are some people, who can't read, or I've worked a lot with the Hispanic community and they can't read in their own language, let alone in English. Or, there's just all kinds of things that like if they'd had this simple like actual action of someone sitting down with them and teaching them and going through it with them, they would actually be in a better place and have a fighting chance. Where right now, maybe as a 30 or 40-year-old trying to learn to read, it's a lot harder. Language
Yeah.
acquisition is a lot harder once kids are older than 7 or 8, because so much of their brain is formed by the time they're even 5. And most
Yeah.
kids starting school, like 80% or something like that. Don't quote me on the statistic, but I just remember being floored one time, like, oh my goodness, my kid's supposed to know that much. Like
Yeah.
they're supposed to be doing enough to really form their brain by that age. And that's why people will say, yeah, kids' brains are malleable. Like they're very easily folded, sorry, molded, not folded,
Yeah.
molded, reshaped. There you
Yeah.
go. The late night talk show. That's what's
No,
going
I
on right
get
now.
it.
But yeah, it's like crazy because I taught adults Spanish the year my little Maddie was born. I would teach night classes via Zoom. So that was hard, but it was also
Yeah.
nice to work from home. So I'm not going to complain. But what was challenging is that I had all these adults ranging from about 18, so just graduated high school, to about 40, 45. It was a landscaping company here in Utah.
Hmm.
And anyone that wanted could come and attend this class. They bought the books, and then this company out in Boston hired me, and I taught the class. Well, there were like probably 5 to 10 people that dropped the class in the first few weeks because it was so much work, not like homework, just work to come to class, work to follow along and try to comprehend, to make their brains see something that wasn't making sense, to learn what the accents meant, to learn how to say the alphabet even in a different language, all those things.
Yeah.
That it still is like a testament to me that it is so much easier to teach reading and language at a young age. I'm sure
Yeah.
you agree.
Yeah, and there are statistics that are kind of scary and like a little disheartening sometimes. But I have to remind myself they're just a statistic, and we can still support kids that, go
Right.
past that statistic. But there are some that I've come across several that reinforce that if you are behind after first grade, um, there is you have less and less chance to catch up. Um, by fourth grade. And
Uh-huh.
so, or something around that line. I just know the first grade portion, like if you are behind in first grade at the end of first grade,
Right.
or maybe at the second grade, just right around that age, that it's going to, statistically, it's going to be really difficult to catch up. And I really believe it's because all of those foundational skills where you learn the majority of all the sound spelling patterns that make up our language are in first grade, kind of creeping into second grade.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's like a crucial year. It's crucial.
Makes sense. But and like I like what you said, because yeah, we don't want to like scare away anyone or
Mhm. Or have
get
anyone lose hope if they're like, I have a
yeah,
fourth grader that's so behind and they're
get
never gonna catch
downhearted
up.
about statistics. Exactly, exactly. But it's like it's interesting. And I didn't even take statistics or anything in college because I was like, why would I? Like
Yeah.
numbers are not my favorite thing. Language arts is always, right? But I think that as we go on, for example, I just felt like I could make much more of an impact as an elementary school teacher because you're touching, hopefully, at least 30 some kids at a time, depending on how big your class
Yeah.
is. And then I was just hoping that um, from there, like when I decided to write and stuff, that I would still be able to reach out and touch people. But um, I think what's hard is like I much prefer working with kids than adults, and that's not because I don't like adults. It's just because I feel like there's a lot more scope and sequence. There's a lot more of that, like step by step. What is the word? Scaffolding that's
Mhm.
kind of built in for kids.
Yeah.
That's not you can't teach adults at the same rate that you do kids because of the role that scaffolding plays, and you feel like you're almost like too juvenile when you're scaffolding for adults.
Yeah.
I speak from experience, but
Yeah.
I'm sure you know like how that's been valuable for you in tutoring. And what do you think for you personally have been like the biggest challenges with either tutoring or early literacy or mapping out the curriculum? What's been the hardest thing for you?
Oh man. With mapping out the curriculum has been finding the right scope and sequence, because there's so many and there's not a universal agreed upon one of
Right.
what order you should teach the sound spelling patterns in. And so I've looked at so many and I've just had to come to grips with like, this is what works for me. And I need to be okay with that. Like, even like the tiniest discrepancy of like some people put teaching digraphs before blends, or some don't even include blends. They just kind of assume a kid should learn it or understand it. And I very much disagree.
Yeah.
And so I put blends before digraphs. That's just my personal preference. I don't really think there's, I don't, it is whatever on that range. I just prefer it that way. Because it also reinforces short vowels. And anyway, so and then I move on to digraphs. So there's just things like that where I feel like there's so much I want to do and there's not enough time to do it. And I second guess myself a lot of like, okay, wait, but what if there is a better scope and sequence out there? Like, should I have I found it yet? And then I had to finally just be like, nope, I'm making what works for me, and this is what is working for my students I tutor. And I remember what worked when I was in the classroom and what didn't. And so I just have had to just like trust myself to do what I know is best. And I've done a ton of research and I'm taking classes and I'm like, I'm doing the work. So I'm not just like picking like an order out of
Right.
air, right? That's probably been the most challenging for me. And then when it comes to tutoring, the most challenging has probably just been the age range, in the sense of like I have fourth graders on a first grade level, but I also have a second grader who's bored with me going backwards, even though he needs it. So it's just trying to like meet all those individual needs in a back to back to back setting where I have like a 30-minute session here and then the next one's coming in and I have to like I have the same like the same flow of my lesson, but I have to completely adjust it every time, which is fine. Like I can do it, no big deal, but it's just kind of like I don't know, I just have to,
Frame yourself or your mind.
yeah, gear myself up.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's kind of the beautiful thing about tutoring is that you get to give that extra individual attention, right, to each kid. And that's like the value of it, of course, because often when tutors are recommended by teachers or by other, leaders or whatever, it's generally because a kid is not getting enough attention for a specific need that they have. But I can see why that would be really challenging. And there's only so many hours in the day and so many days in the week that you can tutor. And so when you do have those back-to-back sessions, just kind of like a reset, but yeah, before each kid.
Yeah.
But that is beautiful what you're doing, because I think that you're making a big difference. I think the one-on-one is just huge. It's actually made me
So
want
fun.
to on and off. I
Yeah.
go back and forth with it because I feel like my son is like not excelling, but just really thriving in public school. Not just like socially, not just with athletics. He's really good at math, but he pushed himself to become good at reading. And I feel like a lot of that came from his classroom environment. I was just being consistent here at home. Like, these are the rules. We always read and do our chore, whether it's loading the dishes or washing the table or video games. He happens to be really good at video games. And he and my husband really enjoy that. So, like, that's a motivation for him, though. It's not like a punishment. He just knows, oh, if I want that screen time, I just need to go read to mom or read to myself. Which I still have him read to me because he's so young. And there are often times where we'll still switch some words, but he loves graphic novels like Dogman or something. And so if he's really into one, like he got one for Easter, and he read it throughout the day, one day, like he read it in one day. And I was just so proud of him because I'm fine reading graphic novels, but like I'd rather read an adult graphic novel, which are full of words, versus like a little bit more of a comic strip feel to it. But reading is reading. You're going to hear it here. You're going to hear it all the time. So I'm thrilled if there's something that has him keep coming back, being intrigued for more. So he's like asking, can we go to the library and check out the other ones? And that same with like, of course, the importance, and I know you'll say this too, of parents reading aloud to their kids, even as they're older, like read a chapter book together. I'm reading Harry Potter, the illustrated version, out loud to him right now, but I'll also just read out loud to the kids at night, and all of them. And I just got them into Amelia Bedelia, and they're laughing and they love that her name rhymes. And so we literally went to the library yesterday and checked out 4 of the Amelia Bedelia books. Some of them are the newer ones, like when she's a kid, that are written by Peggy Parrish's son, but they're still fun. Still like, kind of the goofy, ditzy Amelia Bedelia,
Yeah.
especially with all the idioms and that. But then there's some I can read books with Amelia Bedelia. So then my son wanted to check out that slew. And I was like, this is awesome. Like, I love that. I love visiting the library. I love having like this motivation to go and read. But like, I hope always that people have access to literacy and to materials, right? To resources, because it's just so sad. Like, I remember even when I was in elementary school, my parents would fill out a survey of like approximately how many books are there in the house. And I'm proud to say that I have no idea how many there are, especially after our flood, but there are books in every room of this house, including the
Yeah.
bathroom. There are
Yeah.
books in every room. And I'm hoping once we remodel a little bit that my front room, it's just like a nice little front living room area, kind of like you have to. I want to turn that into a library. Like, I want it to be
Yeah.
a library with a lot of the books that I kept from when I taught school, a lot of picture books, adult books, and then just like a little reading nook or some kind of cozy thing. Because it's just
Yeah.
that important to me. Like, if people come over to my house and they just want to sit on a chair and read, I'm going to feel complimented, not,
Yes.
not offended, because it's so important to me. But anyway, I just remember growing up, like thinking, are there kids that have less than 100 books at their house? That's
Yeah.
weird. Because you know how when you're a kid, you just like see, there's a
Yes.
point where you just see your reality,
Yeah.
and then you start learning to look outside yourself. It happens at
Yeah.
a different time for everybody, but I just remember thinking, how are there any kids that only have like 10 books, including
Yeah.
library books? Oh, there are
Oh, I know
many
there are.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you said was so important too about finding resources that are like affordable. That's a huge part of my why with Reading Noodle.
Okay.
Because I worked in a Title I school in Kearns, Utah. And so
Oh,
I just
yes.
saw a lot of really hard things.
Yeah.
And just like would like want to stuff my students' pockets with granola bars, and like they just came with like grumbling tummies and didn't know when or if they were going to get dinner. And so a big thing was like I had these wonderful parents who were working like 3 to 4 jobs just to support their families and wanting resources, but I knew they like couldn't afford anything expensive. And so that was a big part of creating Reading Noodle, was like this should be like the research that science of reading is pushed out and applying it, which is the Orton Gillingham method, and putting it all together, like it should be affordable. It should not be
Right.
breaking the bank to have children who are like taught correctly, the correct
Right.
method. And it shouldn't be something that parents feel is so out of reach. Like, oh, I'd have to go back to school for that, or I'd have to like invest in this big course. Like it just should be affordable. And it shouldn't break the bank, right? To help your child learn to read.
I definitely agree with that. That's so funny that you went that route, because my next question or thought for you was like, what resources do you recommend parents seek out or start with? And I know you've mentioned Orton and Gillingham a few times. Do you mind also explaining that a little bit more? Because it is really cool, but if someone's just like listening, or like they hear it, but they're like, I don't know what that is. Do you mind
Yeah.
explaining it for a sec?
I'll do my best. I feel like it's so fresh in my mind, but
Yes.
essentially, Gillingham is like taking all the science from the science of reading and they put it into a method and an approach for teaching that. So it's like they have an awesome scope and sequence that I like, and then they're like very much about kinesthetic learning and putting in like tactile learning, and they have a very like explicit approach to how children learn to read and how you should teach them. So
Uh-huh.
it's very step by step, and it's just an awesome training. Most of what I was trained in, I knew. I was surprised as I was taking the training, like, oh, I know this. Like
Right.
I taught it this way. So I wasn't Orton Gillingham trained when I was teaching, but I had an amazing reading coach who was over like all the teachers and would coach us. And I don't know, she wasn't trained in it either, but she had amazing training that was very aligned with that. So it's more like a method. It's a method of how to teach reading. Then I take that method and I created a curriculum essentially that aligns with that method. And several other people have too. So it's, when you're like getting my curriculum or anyone who's Orton Gillingham trained, that they are like immersed in the science of how your brain learns to read. And then they've created tools and resources and activities that align with that science. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and this is going to be kind of interesting too, and I'll have to like look it up. But I had an interview. I don't think it was this season. I want to say it was season 2. I had the most interesting conversation where I was kind of first. Well, I've been introduced to Orton Gillingham, but I haven't done it. However, I have wanted to because I just feel like there's so much good information there that would be helpful in the process of teaching kids to read. And I interviewed a lady. I'm looking up her name right now. Her mother-in-law suffered a really serious accident. Now, I don't remember the details of it, but she had created this company that the woman I interviewed is now the CEO of. But after her accident, she couldn't speak, definitely could not read, had to be retaught those things. But they used her curriculum from this business to teach her how to read, and it worked. So even though she had like suffered some severe brain damage and almost kind of had that childlike approach to reading, like that first look, when they used her methods to reteach her, she learned to read and speak again.
That's so cool.
It was so cool. And I didn't ever get her on my show, but it was her daughter-in-law that I interviewed. And I was just so blown away by that story because I was like, I can't imagine what it would be like to like be older but not like you didn't have the accident. You didn't lose your learning because you're older. You lost it because of an accident. And then to rely on other people to like help you find your way back. I just was like that. Wow. Like it was so inspirational, which is why I want to make sure I like mention her name because I have that episode in here, but I was like, yeah, now I need to interview the mother-in-law because I just want to hear from her perspective now that she's been on the other side of learning using her curriculum and Orton Gillingham, like how she came back. Here we go. The company's called Phonics in Motion. And the woman I interviewed is Karina Powers. Oh, that's good.
Phonics in Motion.
Yes. And they have such a fun program because it's a lot like don't just teach the kids while they're sitting, have them get up while they're making the sounds. And you'll have to check out their Instagram too. They are incredible. But the Phonics in Motion program was made and created by her mother-in-law.
That's really cool.
It was just like a really cool reminder again, because I already mentioned adults and adult learning is a whole new ballgame. It's very different from children learning, but because they kind of treated it like, well, she's kind of like a kid would be. We're going to reteach these things using her curriculum. And then like a while later, I don't know how many years, maybe a year, they explained to her how her work had come full circle and kind of like rescued her neuron center and everything, and how she was the key to her own recovery, so it was kind of cool. It was like really like, that's cool. Wow, that they need to make a movie about that or something, or a documentary. I don't know, something that was just so cool to me. But I want to go back to something that you had mentioned as we're wrapping up here. And I just think at the end of the day, why I love pulling people here on For the Love of Literacy is your why. So what's cool is I haven't really, except for the Phonics in Motion group, I haven't really had anyone on my show like you before, especially a tutor. I've had different teachers. I've had reading specialists. I've had a lot of authors, which is always fun. I like helping them get their name out there. But what's cool is I think what you're offering and your why makes it that much more special because you really are doing it out of the goodness of your heart and from experience you had in a Title I school, which is
Yeah.
also how I started. I didn't
Yeah.
end there, but 2 years in the Title I school and then being pulled over to an East Side school to actually do a substitute position, a long-term substitute that then led to a full-time position. Oh, it was like night and day. I
Mhm.
went between and I taught in downtown Salt Lake. So I
Yeah.
had 5 to 6 kids from the homeless shelter in my classroom every year.
Wow.
And depending on the season, that would change.
Yeah.
And so when those were the kids that had the biggest behavior problems, I was
Yeah.
not surprised because they didn't even know if they were going to have dinner that night or if they had somewhere to
Yeah.
sleep. And that's a way bigger, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's
Yep.
a way bigger deal, right?
Yep.
But I was just like, please, please, you need to learn this so that you can break the cycle, so that you
Yeah.
can get out of this life. Oh, it was so heartrending.
It
And
is.
for example, when I had parent teacher conferences there, I would translate my own conferences in Spanish, and I would offer to do it for other teachers, but I was really spread thin. So I did my own. But even with that, I was lucky if I got half my class parents to come to parent teacher conference. And then I went
Yeah.
to the East Side School, and I not only had every parent come to parent teacher conference, I had them come and visit whenever they darn well felt like it.
Yeah.
It was so
It's very
different.
different. Yeah.
And it wasn't even a private school. I was at what was considered an arts school. Like they had a music grant, they
Oh,
had an
okay.
art program, but it was not a private school. You would have thought so because I had parents just show up, not for a
Mhm.
field trip, not even to help in my classroom, just to chat with me about what I wasn't doing for their child or what
Yeah.
I could do better. Or, it was just like,
Yeah.
wow. Enough so that I actually was offered the 6th grade language arts position at this school, and they weren't quite ready to move to junior high, which is kind of more a thing now. Like 6th grade is either in an elementary school or it's the bottom level at the middle school or the junior high. And I was feeling really pressured because I'd had these 5 awesome years. At that point, 4 awesome years in 4th grade. Felt really comfortable with the curriculum. Loved the age group, like 9 and 10-year-old boys and girls. Makes so much sense to me,
Yeah.
more than like the teenage moody, like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So I was more nervous actually about that. But when they said it's language arts, you're going to be the writing and reading teacher for 6th grade, I was like, because I never would do it in high school. I don't think I would enjoy that. I maybe because I had such a bad experience with my AP reading and newspaper teachers in high school. I don't think I would, and it's just an age thing too. Plus, my degree is in elementary education.
Sure.
But that actually, the first time Utah submitted the certificate or whatever, it was K-8. Now it's K-6. I'm pretty sure,
Yeah.
but either way,
Yeah.
I was qualified, right? And the craziest thing is that before I'd even made up my mind if I was going to switch to 6th grade the next year, I was majorly tempted because my 4th graders from 2 years back would be the 6th graders. So I get to
Mm.
teach them again, and I
Yeah.
was like, that's kind of cool. But before I even made my final decision, the PTA or some parent group had gotten together and discussed why they didn't think I would be a good fit for the position. And they
Oh.
talked my principal down enough that she came to me and said, how badly do you want to do it? And I'm like, well, if people are saying they don't think I can do it, that doesn't
Oh.
feel very good to me.
Yeah.
Because, everybody has to start somewhere. So, and I always
Yeah.
say that, like when you know that a teacher is new, when you know an
Yeah.
employee is new, even if it's at the soda and cookie shop that you enjoy going to, or a waitress at a restaurant you go to, give them grace because
Yeah.
everyone has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And so it just really hurt my heart, especially when I later found out that one of the parents voicing that opinion that I wouldn't be qualified or I wouldn't do a good job. Because, by then the state testing is a little bit more
Yeah.
Repetitive, comprehensive, a lot more. Yeah, like we're writing essays in
Mm.
sixth grade versus just like the 2 paragraphs or whatever in third and fourth grade. And I was aware of all of that. Like I was actually friends with the sixth grade science teacher and the math teacher. And the sixth grade language arts teacher was retiring, but she was retiring early because she didn't like how the parents treated her at the school. And she also didn't like vibe super great with the principal, which I did. But when she came to me and asked like how badly I wanted to do it, I was kind of like, well, I didn't ask to do it, So it was like, I don't know if I feel like I could be a real force for good. And I ended up turning it down and opted for one more year in fourth grade. I knew it really well. I was
Yeah.
wanted there, but I just thought, man, like to everybody out there that judges a first year teacher, a first year anything, first year nurse, whatever, like just give them grace because they've got to learn somehow. We want them
Yeah.
to learn on the job. No, we don't want like someone to learn to be a surgeon, like in a really critical surgery.
Right.
Okay. There are things like that that I understand your hesitation on. You want an expert, I like a C-section for me with my babies or something with your foot or something big. But like when it comes to something like that, I just think, um, what a waste because it could have actually been a really good year. I was excited to see some fourth graders again. I was the gifted and talented teacher at my school, so we didn't have enough funds to actually have a teacher or like a pullout. What's
Mm.
ironic is when I was at the Title I school, they did. They
Yeah.
did have the, but you know how it goes in a Title I school. They really try to get the money where it's going to make the most impact. But when I went over to this school, that's actually I started all my masters as well at Utah State online. And it's a shame because I was like halfway there and then I got pregnant and got really sick. And then I had postpartum depression and I never finished my degree. I was going to finish through University of Phoenix when we moved to Arizona. So sometimes I regret that, especially because I was like, I just think I would have such a good time writing a thesis about, you
It was
know,
fun.
yeah, socioeconomic status and how it impacts literacy and learning and all these things. My husband's like, you can write a paper, just go get some books. And I'm like, no, that's not the same thing because when you have to write it and you have to defend it, like
Yeah.
for a grade and for an audience, that's way different than just writing. You've got to have a purpose to your writing, right? Minus journaling and stuff. That can just be personal, that can be for your family. But yeah, you know what I'm saying. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm sure yours was tons of work. I know Sarah did her master's too, and I'm just like, bravo, because I know that's a ton of work, and I wish I had gone through with it. But at the same time, I started tutoring not long after that because I realized I needed something else. I needed to get busy serving other people, get my mind off myself. Thankfully, we were in Arizona, so I was outside getting sun every day, even in the winter, and
Yeah.
pulled through that time. But like, there's just so much, right? I feel like we've talked about a ton, but I'm just really grateful you took the time to come on, that we took our, precious mom time, which is when the kids go to bed and you're a small business owner and there are things to do, of course. But I'm glad you came, Carla, and I'm just so hopeful that like this helps more people find Reading Noodle, find your resources. Yes.
Yeah, thank you
Um,
so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
yeah, will you tell everyone where they can find you? Instagram,
Yeah.
website, blog, all that stuff.
Yeah, so you can find me at readingnoodle.org. And then you can also find me just at Reading Noodle on Instagram. That's where I spend most of my time. I'm about to release my short vowel curriculum, which will just hyper focus on short vowels. So you can find me there, and I'm releasing that hopefully next week if I can use my mom time wisely in the evenings. The goal is to release it next week.
Isn't that just the thing? I mean,
Yeah, I have to sleep at some point. Like I
yeah,
really have
exactly.
to sleep. Yeah.
I remember talking to you about that a few months ago when you were closing down things with Jot, and I'm like, do you sleep? And then you're relaunching Reading Noodle. I'm like,
No.
and it's hard because not only are you running a business, I actually really feel like this. You can tell me as we close here if you feel the same way. But I feel like working part time is almost harder than working full time. because you're in the home, you're still being a mom.
Yeah.
And for me, like there are occasions where I might hire a babysitter or nanny to come help
Mhm.
during the day for a podcast or something else. But other than that, it's me all the
Yeah.
time, running the kids around, doing all the things, and then trying to take care of these other things. So your only time to really get quality work done is when they're asleep.
Oh yeah. And I will like freeze if I'm trying to do it during the day. I either feel super guilty or I will freeze. Like I just shut down because I'm like, no, someone's going to interrupt me. It's just going to happen and I'm not going to finish this thought or this project. So I'm just going to do it later. And then when later comes, I'm like zonked out in bed because I'm so tired. Right. Like, so
Yeah.
it's a balance. I'm still figuring it out. I really am.
I wish you good luck, but I think you're doing great things. It just, yeah, you got to take some time for you so you
Yeah.
can continue to give and do what you want to do. But I want to give advice because I've even had my toddler come on the podcast a few times because my my husband will watch the kids, but one time she was taking a nap and he had taken the older ones out. She
Oh,
woke up. I put Elmo on. She loves Elmo. She was Bluey. But about 10 minutes in, she wanted to be with mom. And it was just like, it's the podcast I'm getting ready to release. So there are random
yeah.
snippets of Elmo and her stubborn no, in the background. And I'm like, that's
Yeah.
okay. People are going to get it, or they're just
Yeah.
going to be like, whatever. Either
Yeah.
way, we're doing the best we can with
Yeah.
what we have. And so, and the time it goes quick, and so that's
Yeah.
actually for me, like I want to provide in a good way for my kids, but I don't want to miss
I
the
know.
actual growing up years. So
I
it's
know.
such a balance, like you're saying. It's really, there are times where there are days where I can get a little bit done, but more because I'm walking around with a laptop now instead of being stuck in my office.
Mhm.
Because especially my toddler, she will get into things. And if it's quiet, sometimes she's looking at a book. I'm very proud of her. Like today, she was like, I want Paid Tablet. And she went into my room and I saw her just flipping through a Bluey book. I'm like, that's so
Uh,
precious. But it's not always that way. It's normally I come out and I find marker all over the wall or a
right.
puzzle or a book or herself,
Yeah.
or her guzzling. She climbs on everything,
Yeah.
guzzles everyone's Easter candy, including her own. So even when it's at time, fell over the back of the couch tonight right before dinner, just like go, go, go. So
I
you
know. I
have to
get
love
it.
it, but it's busy.
It's so busy, but we're doing our best. We are.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Carla. I really appreciate it. Try to get a little rest tonight. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for your time.
You're
And I
welcome.
will be in touch with you soon when I decide to edit and post our podcast.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks
Okay.
so much, Katie.
Yes. Thank you. See you. Good night.
Okay.